Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 615 of the People Behind the Science podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely. And today we are excited to be revisiting our interview with Dr. Jennifer Graham-Engeland, originally broadcast on August 14th of 2015. And listeners, I think many of you will agree that life has been especially stressful for the past year and a half or so. And Jennifer investigates the impact of psychological stress on physical health, as well as the psychological, physiological, and behavioral mechanisms underlying the connections we see between stress and our health. Much of her work has focused on how we respond cognitively and emotionally to stress, and how these responses could be targets for non-drug interventions to help us combat stress and the negative effects of stress. So, listeners, take a deep breath, relax, and we hope you enjoy listening to Jennifer's stories and insights in this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to introduce you all to Dr. Jennifer Graham-Engeland. So, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
Well, we are delighted to speak with you today, and I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit of background information about you. Listeners, Jennifer is an associate professor in biobehavioral health in the College of Health and Human Development at the Pennsylvania State University. She graduated from Cornell University, majoring in psychology and English, and went on to receive her master's and Ph.D. in social and health psychology from Stony Brook University. Jennifer then conducted postdoctoral research at The Ohio State University before joining the faculty where she is today at Penn State. And now Jennifer has been awarded the American Psychosomatic Society Scholar Research Award, as well as the Psychoneuroimmunology Research Society Scholars Award. And Jennifer is here with us today, listeners, to tell us about her journey through life in science. So Jennifer, today we are going to ask you lots of questions because we want to get to know you, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you start off this interview by telling us what you like to do with your time when you're not busy with science?
Sure, I'll try. I think it's so important to have balance in your life as a scientist. And I'm helped by that because I have two children. They are now 7 and 11, so they keep me very busy. My husband and I also bought a new house about a year ago, and although it's been a year, we still have a lot of home projects between just trying to get pictures up on walls and fixing things that break, and in between really enjoying our lovely town. We're in Happy Valley, right? So there are beautiful mountains and hiking around us to engage in. And then in between those times, traveling outside to larger cities is something that we like to do for fun.
Well, that sounds wonderful, Jennifer. And as someone who has dabbled in home improvement myself, I know it is never ending. We've been in our house, I think, 8 years now, and it's just a never ending process, always something. Yeah. Well, great to hear about your life outside of science. But next, we are going to dive into your scientific side. So can you tell us a little bit about how you describe what you do to someone who might not be familiar with science?
A really big theme in my research is that I look at how psychological stress affects physical health. And so stress is something we can all relate to, of course. Mm-hmm. We all experience negative things that make us respond in some way. Some stress is good. It can be motivating, for example. But stress that is severe enough or chronic enough often can be overwhelming, can lead to changes in the body that can be debilitating. So in terms of stress, I like to look at how different people respond to stressful events with thoughts about themselves or the world or people around them, and also their mood, negative or positive mood, or even maybe specific moods like anger. And then in terms of physical health, I often focus on pain, particularly chronic pain. And then I try to link up these things in various ways. What's great about pain is that itself is also useful. It lets us know when something is wrong. But like stress, when it's chronic, it can also be extremely problematic. And it's actually estimated that 1 in 5 Americans experience some form of chronic pain or ongoing pain at some point in their lives.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what I try to do is tie these things together, stress, pain, other forms of health, but also to understand what might help connect them. Because I think that's where we'll be able to better understand how to help people make changes that could improve their well-being. So, of course, there's a lot of potential changes for stress and health connections. I look at psychological changes, as I mentioned, behavioral changes, and also physiological changes that can help explain stress and health connections. So, for example, in some of my work, I obtain blood samples and saliva samples and sometimes hair samples. And from those, we can determine biomarkers of stress and inflammation, inflammation being a substance we can look at in the body that seems to be related to lots of physical health issues, and really give us a window into what's going on in the body in response to stressful events. As an example, right, maybe individuals who respond to stressful events with greater increases in inflammation in their body, particularly if they're chronically stressed, seem to be at a greater risk of ongoing pain and depressed mood. And then finally, in this kind of work, I try to weave in looking at health behaviors like sleep and also social context, like relationship factors. So the picture gets really complicated, but that's real life.
Right.
It's a complicated set of factors that interact with each other to influence our health and well-being. I often say I'm not really an expert at any one of these things. Like, I'm not the world's expert on pain or the world's expert on mood, but I do think I have a lot of expertise at weaving them all together in a way that tries to integrate them. And that's really the bulk of what I do.
Sure. Well, wonderful to hear about your research. And I think for better or worse, stress is near and dear to the hearts of myself, all of our listeners, and most of the world. Everyone experiences some form of stress in their life. And it's interesting to hear how you study the body's response to it and how people respond to it. So how would you characterize your own stress response? Would you say you handle pressure well?
I think that often people study things that are problems for them. Mm-hmm. I think I've gotten a lot better with age at handling stress responses, and that's pretty common. In fact, as people age, they tend to, maybe they have more experiences to draw on, they have more resources. For whatever reason, they seem to be better able to maintain their sense of well-being and calm when things happen. So I think that's been true for me. I also study rumination, like how people will repetitively think about things that have happened to them. And like most people who study rumination, I can be a ruminator too.
You ruminate about your rumination research, yeah.
It gives us a lot of insight into what we might want to study.
Definitely. Well, wonderful to hear about your work, like I said. And I know when I'm stressed out, when I am feeling low, I am always in search of motivation and inspiration. And I love quotes. So I want to hear, Jennifer, today, if you have a favorite motivational or inspirational quote.
I would say most often when I'm looking for inspiration or motivation, I'll actually turn to poetry. Before I became focused on science and research, as you noted, I was an English major at Cornell. And at that time, even before then, I guess, I was particularly inspired by poetry, particularly poets who see beauty in everyday life and nature, whose work can really nurture the soul. It can get tiring being in a competitive academic environment where we're often striving for perfection and where we're doing many things at once, from conducting research to teaching, serving on committees, trying to get grant funding. And all those things can be rewarding, but they don't always work out or pay off right away. So in addition to my family and trying to get out of nature, often I will turn to poetry for inspiration. One particular poem I found really helpful when I was coming up for tenure, which wasn't that long ago.
It's a stressful time, to be sure.
Yes, indeed. Was Walt Whitman's long poem, Leaves of Grass. And it's the one that contains the quote, "Do I contradict myself? Well, very well then, I contradict myself. I'm large and I contain multitudes." And it also contains the often quoted line, not long after that, there's a speaker who's looking up at a hawk in the sky and saying, "I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world." And that part of the poem resonated with me at that time in particular, because I think it's so easy in academia to let your voice be diminished or to feel like your success in life only depends on one thing. But in fact, we're all complicated people and multifaceted, and it's so important to not let your sense of self be diminished.
Well, I love these quotes and a fantastic poem to reference there. And now I'm curious, you mentioned that you were inspired by poetry. You were inspired by a variety of different things throughout your life and your career. I want to know about the people who've inspired you. Do you have any particular individuals that you can really point who had an impact on your career, maybe served as role models?
I was so lucky in my career to work with two amazing women over the course of my training as a scientist, both of whom I would say served as role models for me and whose training was just critically important in getting me to where I am today. First, in graduate school, my mentor in graduate school was Dr. Marcy Lobel. She's a social and health psychologist who focuses on stress and pregnancy outcomes. She was a role model for me in many ways, really showed me the way forward to balancing a successful science career with family. She was just so good at using her life to help me and other students learn not just about the challenges of that kind of process, but also the joys of having a family in academia. And she managed to do that while upholding top-notch scientific standards and also being one of the best undergraduate teachers I've ever seen. I was then really lucky to follow up that experience by doing a postdoctoral fellowship with Dr. Janice Kiko-Glaser, who's a clinical psychologist at the Ohio State University and now the director of the Institute for Behavioral Medicine Research there. And really, she's a superstar in the field of psychoneuroimmunology. But who knew she was also an amazing mentor. So there I learned so much as well, particularly, I guess, about how to manage a laboratory where people are working at many different levels and how to help them work in harmony. I would say she also really modeled for me how you can push yourself to learn a new field, which is what I was doing, but also maintain your integrity and depth in your home field. And what I'm really amazed by, they were such superb mentors. To this day, I still use many of the techniques that they used with me with my graduate students and postdocs in my lab.
Sure. So what is one of these techniques that you found particularly successful?
Both of them gave me a lot of feedback with writing. And I think that's one of the things that graduate students struggle with the most is how to become an effective writer and to write productively. Jan used to have this technique where she would, if you gave her a manuscript, like a draft, she would audio tape herself giving you running commentary on the manuscript.
Oh, wow. She
probably does it digitally now, but she would give us tapes and then we'd put it in a little tape recorder and play it for ourselves. And if you got like a 2-sided tape, you had a lot of work to do.
It's going to be a long week.
So I've done that with students. And then now I use word features more, but I'll try to give a lot of broad feedback instead of specific edits. But actually, if I do give specific edits, try to explain exactly why. You need words for that. And that's where those tapes were helpful.
Definitely. Well, fantastic technique. I'll have to recommend that out there to our listeners, and I'll have to try it myself next time a student sends me a paper. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, wonderful to hear about these people who've had a big impact on your career, but I want to talk next about where it all began. Can you rewind all the way back to the beginning and tell us what sparked your interest in science and psychology?
It's fascinating because I guess lots of people have roads that are not completely linear. For me, my spark with psychology and science came a little bit late. You mentioned I was an English major in college and I was totally into it. I was doing close analyses of poems and books. I could write 10, 15 pages on a 10-line poem.
Wow, that's impressive.
I loved doing that. It was one of my favorite things. And then my junior year, I still hadn't taken science and psychology classes. It was the start of my junior year. I thought maybe I would do an honors thesis in English. And I met with this faculty member, an amazing guy, Dr. Ken McLean, who's retired now, and told him my idea. And I said, I want to write about the role of memory in poems of this particular modern poet whom I loved. And he sort of looked at me funny. And he said that it seemed like what I was proposing was more like a thesis for a psychology department. And I owe him a lot because I actually haven't told him this, but he was right. And around the same time, maybe right after, I took an upper level research methods course somehow I got into, and it totally sparked, it just all really connected for me. I absolutely loved the concepts behind the scientific method, which I really hadn't been steeped in before. So I scrambled and I finished the requirements for the English major. But from that point on, I took tons of psychology courses, managed to cram a psychology major into my remaining time. Another really important jump for me that almost didn't happen was making the leap to graduate school. So after college, I didn't apply right away to graduate school. As a way to earn some money, I worked as a technical writer and an administrator for a small company that evaluated color printers.
How'd you get that job? That's an interesting direction to take.
I had been an English major and I had done some technical writing and a little bit of computer work to make money here and there in college. So I had some background in that and just applied for this job and got it. And it was a great job. I learned a lot about honing writing skills, but also using technology, Word and Excel, for example, in very sophisticated ways that I still use to this day. But when I decided to apply to graduate school after a year or two, it took me 2 more years of cycles of applying to get in. And I think in part it was because I was outside of that field for a while. And also I had in my mind I wanted to apply to clinical psychology Ph.D. programs because I knew I wanted to do clinically relevant research. But it took me a while to realize I don't really have to be a therapist in order to be able to do that. So I actually got into a clinical psychology Ph.D. program and then realized last minute there's a health psychology program, and it was at Stony Brook, which was close to where I was living at the time. And I realized that would be a better fit for me. And that's where I learned about stress and health modeling for the first time and where I became interested in emotion and chronic pain. My dissertation study involved an intervention that involved having people with chronic pain express their anger in a written format. And I showed that the amount of anger that they expressed predicted benefits over time in perceived control over pain and depressed mood, things like that. So the next logical step for me, I just kept thinking about, well, what explained those findings? So that's where that postdoctoral fellowship came in psychoneuroimmunology. And really ever since, I've been trying to put all these variables together, things like stress and emotion, and social context, and behavior and pain and inflammation and immune function. And that really set me up for the faculty position I have now in biobehavioral health at Penn State, which is an extraordinarily interdisciplinary department. We have people who are psychologists, but we also have people who are genetics focused and health promotion focused, all in the same group. And that's just been really satisfying to be part of.
Well, wonderful to hear about your journey, Jennifer. And I think this is reassuring for a lot of people to hear out there who might not have this straight and narrow path directly to a faculty position in science.
Right.
So did you have any resources that you utilized throughout those early years when you were trying to figure out where exactly you fit in or what exactly you wanted to do that you think really helped?
I knew all along after college I wanted to get into a graduate program. Maintaining that awareness for myself was important. And at some point when I was working at that technical writing job, it was in the last year, and I sat down with my boss and I said, look, I really like this job, but you've known from the beginning I'm going to apply to graduate school. And I got him to maintain my salary while letting me have one day off to go volunteer in a research lab.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. And that's what I needed. Immerse myself more in that world and see more what it was like and get that experience. So sometimes you just have to go for it. If he hadn't been able to do that for me, luckily he was great and he did, then I would have just had to quit and make ends meet somehow while volunteering.
I think getting that foot in the door sometimes is the hardest part, just figuring out how you can get the experience you need to then apply for what you want to do. So very cool. Mm-hmm. So we've heard a little bit about how you've gotten to where you are today, Jennifer. I want to know a little bit more about what you're working on today. So can you share with us one of these projects that you are just the most excited about?
You're catching me right at the end of having taken a full sabbatical year, which is one of the great unsung perks of a tenured faculty position. This year, I was able to focus almost exclusively in terms of work on my research and science. So I have a number of projects going on right now. Some I'm leading, some I'm working with as a collaborator, and all of which I'm really excited about. But I can tell you about one project that's quite central to my research program and where I hope to take it. My colleagues and I just had accepted a paper looking at how momentary mood, so positive and negative mood, assessed right in the moment when you're feeling it in daily life, how that connects with momentary pain. And this was actually done in individuals with rheumatoid arthritis. We did this because, I guess it's quite clear that your pain can affect your mood. If you're in pain, you maybe feel worse in terms of your mood.
Right.
But I've really been interested in the degree to which someone's mood can aggravate or contribute to their pain. And even that's not really a controversial idea. A lot of folks with chronic pain will acknowledge that their pain's worse when they're worked up or they're stressed. But most of the scientific evidence for that view that mood can affect pain really comes from either laboratory work where mood and pain are manipulated in an artificial environment, or comparisons between groups or associations over fairly large periods of time where people have to recollect their mood and their pain. And a few studies have come out showing mood pain associations where they've assessed mood and pain in a daily level. But to my knowledge, this work that it's actually going to come out online, I hope, next week.
Oh, very cool. Perfect timing.
Yeah. To my knowledge, this is the first work where we've shown these associations using these more momentary connections. And we found that momentary negative mood was associated with more momentary restrictions in terms of limitations on what people could do, but even stronger evidence that momentary positive mood was associated with less pain and fewer restrictions. And that was over and above a separate impact of depressive symptomatology and also stress experience. The reason I think this kind of work is so exciting is I'm hoping it'll lead to future work where we could intervene in the moment to improve pain using non-pharmacological techniques. Unfortunately, the current pharmacological therapies, narcotics, for example, they just don't work for a lot of people, or they work, but they have side effects.
Right.
Often there's issues with tolerance and addiction, and obviously more work is needed to improve medications. But my angle is trying to develop interventions that can improve pain. And maybe that could be done by improving mood or distracting people by engaging them in things that are fun for them, or through body movement coupled with mindfulness. All of those are ideas that I'm starting to dabble in. But the thing is that people carry these smartphones around with them now, and researchers can use these not only to assess how their people are doing, but also potentially to intervene, to deliver a message or to encourage a certain behavior right there in the moment. So that's kind of where I see the future of some of this work.
Very, very cool. And I know a lot of these are hot topics right now. Things like mindfulness, things like trying to have a more positive attitude for more positive mood going through life. Is there something that you are perhaps interested in investigating first, or a particular piece of evidence in the literature that you think looks promising? Something that we could say, all right, listeners, if you do this right now today, it might make you feel better.
I think people do need to engage in whatever helps them feel good. And I think that has to be individual. So if it's going for a walk in nature, if it's reading a book, playing with your kids, whatever it is for you, trying to be really mindful in those moments and have more of those moments and remember them and think about them and reflect on them. Because I think it's all too easy for us to get caught up in some of the more negative stuff and to ruminate or reflect too much on that stuff. And we have to really be mindful of all of it. You wouldn't want to ignore negative things because, again, those are motivating and important to deal with.
Right. And they're not going to go away if you ignore them. Sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone has them. But to be mindful of the positive as well.
Gotcha. Well, I think that is so important today. I feel like people are getting busier and busier, maybe in quotes there, with all the things they're packing their life with, to take a moment to do something you enjoy, reflect on it, and enjoy it. So fantastic advice there for our listeners. And now I'm curious, we've talked so far, Jennifer, about a lot of the exciting aspects of your career, but I want to hear next about one of the challenges, one of the struggles, one of the things that maybe didn't quite go as planned. So can you take us back to a point where you had a major failure, you really struggled with something, and tell us what happened and how you were successful and got through it?
You're right. Stuff like that happens all the time, and how you handle it can make a big difference. I am sure I have several stories I could tell. The one that stands out the most to me is when I first went to apply for a tenure track academic job. I feel like it was the first time, probably wasn't, but I feel like it was the first time that I tried really hard to do something and failed. And I failed just abjectly. This was right after graduate school. And increasingly in health psychology, every field's different, but in health psychology, I think increasingly it's proving to be necessary for new Ph.D.s to do some time as a postdoctoral student before they go on to a faculty job, which is in the end what I did, right? And that was by far the best thing I could have done. But I thought at the time, well, sure, I'll apply to postdoc positions, but why don't I see if I could skip that and get a faculty position right away? I had just had my first child. She was 4 weeks old when I went on my first faculty interview.
Oh, wow.
Looking back, I should not have tried that.
Talk about stress right there.
But off I went. When I had 2 interviews, I just did terribly at both of them. My brain, especially for that first one, when Emily was 4 weeks old, my brain just wasn't working. I was tired. I wasn't really myself. Mm-hmm. That wasn't 100% all of it, though. I wasn't prepared, I think, to be an independent scientist yet. I gave an okay talk, but I didn't answer questions particularly well. And I just know that in multiple interviews with individuals there at these different jobs, I know I did or said exactly the wrong thing several times. So I didn't get either job. I was just devastated. I remember crying over the phone to a friend of mine from graduate school. And she said, you know what, life's going to go on and you're great and this is going to be fine. And then I realized while I wasn't prepared to be a faculty member yet, I could be a really great postdoc. And I applied to several positions and got offers at some really great top-notch places. So I'm just so lucky it worked out that way because that time as a postdoc helped me prepare so much. I learned this whole new area of research, but I also learned how to run a lab and got better experience writing. So in the end, I was much more competitive for a really great faculty position. But it was hard at the time.
Definitely. Now, do you think those initial failed interviews, as we might call them, helped you when you actually had to go through the interview process again after your postdoc?
Absolutely. And I was just telling, there's a postdoctoral fellow working with me, I was just telling her that she should definitely apply right away. And even if she only gets 1 or 2 interviews and doesn't know that they're going to work out, I mean, go do it. What's the worst that can happen? She's fantastic, so she'll probably get jobs right away. But for me, it was so helpful to draw on those memories when I had job interviews the next time around.
Absolutely. And I think this job search is becoming more and more of a pain point for graduate students out there, or even postdocs as well at that level. So great to hear your experiences and how you were able to eventually successfully get this faculty position. And now, Jennifer, I want you to tell us one of your success stories next. So I love celebrating the successes in science, and these can be the little victories along the way or some of these big wins for science. So can you share one of these experiences of yours?
I think you're absolutely right. Every time there's an award given or a paper published by someone in my lab group, I try to celebrate it. It's so easy to be like, oh, good, that happened, and then just move on to the next thing.
Check it off the to-do list.
Exactly, without taking the time to acknowledge how great it is and how much time went into it. And my lab and I have had some cool papers published lately, even some that have gotten some press, and that's great. I think probably the biggest accomplishment of mine lately, I'm working on an NIH-funded project where I'm one of several principal investigators, a longitudinal project designed to show how stress can contribute to cognitive aging as measured by memory and cognitive performance. And we're looking at whether stress does that by increasing worry and rumination or thinking repetitively about problems in a negative way, and also if it contributes to cognitive aging by dysregulating stress hormones and inflammation. So those data are just starting to come in, and I've been working with others on the team to analyze them this summer, which feels very exciting. And our protocol paper describing the project was just published this past week as well. And that's a paper that just describes the study and our goals and its methodology. It's called The Effects of Stress on Cognitive Aging, Physiology, and Emotion, or ESCAPE project. And I'm just so excited to see it moving forward. It also has this really novel cohort of predominantly African American and Hispanic participants who live in the Bronx. And I really, truly feel like if we can continue funding for this project and follow these individuals over time, I think we'll be able to really advance understanding of what modifiable risk factors can contribute to cognitive aging, and hopefully identify some things that could be done to reduce the risk of performance degradation that can so often happen with aging.
Definitely. I think this is a fascinating field and really important considering our increasing aging population in this country and really across the world. And now I'm curious, though, is there a balance, do you think, between this stress and trying to maintain an enriched environment or complex activities as you're aging? Because I think the more you're doing, the more you're trying to do, perhaps the more stress you're experiencing. But both things have a pull and push relationship with cognitive decline.
There's always that balance and push and pull. I think as individuals age, there's more often a tendency in some people to be engaged less. Maybe you don't have kids in the house anymore and you're not traveling as much. So particularly for older adults, I think the message of trying not to do too much, you're right, but to be more cognitively active and to think about things that happen as pleasurable instead of stressful is really important.
Gotcha. Well, great to hear about this exciting new work that you have coming out. We'll have to check out the protocol paper and keep following it as the study moves on. And I know we've chatted a little bit throughout our interview about some of the different places that you've been, for example, going on your sabbatical, some of the different places you went for your training opportunities. And I think travel opportunities are really important in a career in science. You get to share your research, you get to meet people from all over the world. Jennifer, can you share with us today one of your own favorite travel experiences?
I have a really hard time choosing. I've had some amazing experiences, especially when I travel internationally to attend a conference. I really try to get some extra time in the country at the start or at the end of the conference. What makes this particularly fun is my husband is in a similar field to me, so we often travel together. In fact, he proposed to me in Athens, Greece a few days prior to a conference.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. So I have to mention that one. But one really cool trip for a conference not long ago was a Psychoneuroimmunology research group in Sweden. My husband and I decided to go to Norway for a few days vacation first. And we got to tour fjords and travel by train through some of the most beautiful country I've ever seen. And we went to two cities, Bergen and Oslo, briefly before heading to Sweden for the conference. What really made that Norway even more special was a colleague of mine here had a friend in Bergen, someone we'd never met. And this woman, Dr. Helga Eriksson, she opened her home to us, let us stay with her for 2 nights, showed us around, even bought us dinner. And then a colleague of hers, Dr. Holger Ursen, he showed me around and introduced me to students of his, which was incredibly useful because I wound up getting in a whole day earlier than my husband due to a flight mishap.
Oh, dear.
I would have been on my own.
Hanging out, yeah.
And he made dinner at his house with his wife, like best salmon I've ever had in my life. They were just so lovely and generous and welcoming. So in general, we really try to get off the beaten track when we travel too. For example, we had a conference in Dublin once and we toured around in a rental car in Northern Ireland. Those experiences are often the most interesting, and we've had really great luck meeting just really friendly and wonderful people.
Certainly. And I love at this point you brought up of your extended relationships in science, really almost providing a family, no matter where you are in the world, people who are friends of friends or colleagues of friends or things like that. I think you have this wonderful network. So are there a lot of opportunities that you had in different conference experiences to meet these people and work with them?
Sure. It's great how it just keeps growing. You're right. It's just a wonderful thing about science that it opens these doors to meet people and get to learn more about them. And I love what you do on this audio blog in terms of getting people to share more of their full story as a scientist, because that's what you get when you travel with people or you go to their home. You get to see how they're living and how they've set up their lives. Mm-hmm. So for sure, when we go to conferences, even just hanging out with people late at night, you get to talk to them and hear more about their lives.
Right. It's definitely the conversations venture outside of the basic research and more into the bigger picture of what people are doing in their days. So I love it. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing some of your travel stories. And we mentioned in our introduction that you are an English major and talked a little bit about your experiences there. I want to now know, what are your favorite books and what do you recommend that myself and my listeners read?
I love to read. I don't get to read as much as I would like to these days because I'm reading so many scientific papers and working pretty hard. But when I read for pleasure, I like to really make it count. And what I most enjoy is science fiction. So that's what I read in the evening. And one book I read almost a year ago still resonates with me, which is amazing. It was a book called Perdido Street Station by China Miéville. Amazingly, this was one of his first novels. And I say amazing because it's just an immensely rich story. In fact, it won the Arthur C. Clarke Award, I believe. It's set in a fictional world with lots of alien species intermingled, that sort of thing. What I loved about it was engaging on so many levels. There was the level of world building, like, oh, what a cool monster this author's created.
Right. Setting the stage there. Yeah, I like it.
Amazing stuff there. Relationship dynamics between characters. The plot was great. All the way up to like social political dynamics of the culture in which it was set. It's just so rich. And then a huge perk for me was that the author just has a wickedly awesome vocabulary. I feel like my vocabulary is pretty good. But I had to look up at least 20 words when I was reading this.
Oh, wow.
Which I found to be just a lot of fun.
Do you recall one of these vocabulary words that you learned?
Yeah, I've tried to integrate some into my everyday life just to have fun with it. One of them was, I think it's oneric. Do you know that word?
I do not.
Good, that makes me feel better. I think it means something like of or relating to dreams. So dreamlike.
Ah.
Yeah.
I was thinking like ornery or something, but yeah. that's way better.
Yeah, like, so what an oneric landscape, something like that.
Very cool. Well, Jennifer, excellent book recommendation. We'll put that out on our website for our listeners. And I'm curious, have you ever dabbled in writing yourself? Have you attempted to write science fiction or any other genre of book?
Oh, I've dabbled a little, but it's not my forte. I think I'm much better at scientific writing with a logical progression to make a point. And I learned that pretty early on. Maybe I was just too chicken to take enough creative writing classes in college, but I've always focused on scientific writing.
Gotcha. Well, that's fair.
Yeah.
I know any sort of thing that I start writing, it's always one chapter in, you're not sure where to go. And so, But Jennifer, we've talked a little bit throughout our interview about some of the people who you've been able to meet over the course of your career. I want to now hear about the human side of science from your perspective and some of your experiences there in terms of traditions and just fun memories that you shared with these brilliant creative people you've been able to work with.
I feel like here I don't have crazy or funny stories so much, but I can definitely think of warm, fuzzy stories.
We'll go with warm, fuzzy then. I like it.
They have to do with the principal investigators I was working with in different labs, just letting me into some aspect of their personal life. I mean, there's always barriers between faculty and students, and I think those are often appropriate, but at times it can be so rewarding to get a glimpse into the lives of people you're working with. When I was working with Jan Kegel-Glaser, for example, she was so highly successful and serious. But once a year, she would have us over for a barbecue, and it must have been in the spring because I remember getting to see her daffodil gardens. And she must have had multiple thousands of daffodils.
That is incredible.
She had all planted herself. There, like, it's showing you that she does have this life outside of science. And then one of my favorite memories working with Marcy was similar. She was also serious and busy. She had to be. She was balancing science and family. In fact, I remember she had had a baby while I was in graduate school, and while she was on maternity leave, let me come to her house to go over a manuscript. And just to be sitting there in her kitchen with, someone who I so admired, and to be given that special opportunity to be included like that in her life was very memorable. So now thinking, my husband and I are in the same department now, actually, as faculty. And we were just talking the other day, we're going to try to do some more things like this. Maybe have a big lab party, inviting people over who work with us, or maybe organizing something where all the faculty and graduate students in our department can come and mingle and have fun in a relaxed setting outside of the department. I think those times are so important.
Well, I think that is a great idea. Sounds like it'll be a fun party. And I know I definitely agree that this is a great opportunity to see people outside of their element. You know, you see people at work every day and you kind of know what they do at work, but in most cases, you have no idea what their life is like outside of work. And that's one of the things we love to highlight on our program. So do you have a perhaps unusual hobby or some sort of pastime that you really enjoy that you haven't mentioned yet that you think your students would be surprised to hear about?
No, I mean, not really. Maybe the adventures that I have when I'm traveling, you'd probably be surprised about. Like, I'll go and stay out till 3 or 4 in the morning and live it up when I'm at a conference. And maybe that would be kind of surprising.
Sure. I
try to tell students, it's fine. You can do that. Go to a conference and sure, stay out late and have some drinks and talk to people and have fun. But you still have to get up at 8 in the morning and get down to the conference.
Right.
And I feel like I'm pretty good at that. I can't keep that up for more than a few days, but yeah.
Well, that works out well. Most conferences are only a couple of days, so you just crash at the end of it.
That's right.
Well, Jennifer, great to hear a little bit about some of these experiences that you've had, the warm, fuzzy side of science. I like how you put it there. And I know we've chatted a little bit about some of your research and the big questions that you're trying to answer in the lab, but I want to know about these big questions that you haven't yet been able to tackle, Jennifer, your dream questions. So if we gave you everything, if things like funding and staff and technology and feasibility were not a problem, what is the question that you would want to answer first?
I love it. If only it were so. As I mentioned, I'm really hoping my work will help eventually contribute to the development of non-pharmacological interventions for chronic pain. But even if I had funding to do all these intervention studies, I think before jumping into them, it's just really critical to better understand the connections between psychosocial factors and pain and how physiological responses and behavioral responses help connect them. So what I would want to do would be just a huge study using ecological momentary assessment where mobile devices are used to assess how people are doing in the moment in daily life, and pair that with observing physiological changes in the moment as well, and then following people over, well, let's follow them over years because we have money, right? Mm-hmm. Feasibility really is a huge issue there because we can ask people on smartphones or whatever they have how they're feeling in the moment, what their mood is, and if they've experienced something stressful or uplifting. But how do we, say, get a marker of inflammation from their body in the moment in daily life? I could have someone follow them around and collect blood from them 5 times a day.
Pinpricks, yeah.
Go up to them in the middle of dinner and get blood spot like people do when they're testing their blood sugar. We can actually get markers of inflammation from that, but it's really hard to get people to do that 5 times a day. Yeah, maybe we could use saliva. We can get markers of inflammation from saliva these days. But again, there's methodological limitations. In order to really get valid measures of inflammation from saliva, people would have to spend about over 5 minutes collecting the sample and then really freeze it right away.
Oh, wow.
Which again, not very feasible, particularly if you're trying to do this at times when you're stressed. So you've just had a fight with your spouse and now you're supposed to
spit in a cup for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So those are the limitations, and my team and I are actually currently working to figure out how to capture dynamics between stress response and inflammation and pain using other types of techniques to try to get at the most relevant data we can.
Well, these are great questions, Jennifer. I like it. I love dreaming big with scientists and hearing about the big questions on their mind. I think it's so much fun to talk about all the possibilities. And I think as time goes by, a lot of these dream questions are becoming more and more of a reality. So we might get there in the future.
I hope so.
So I'm curious, we've talked about some of the people who've had a big impact on you along your journey as a scientist. Jennifer, I want to know who gave you the best piece of advice and what was this piece of advice?
The best advice I've been given, which I didn't follow right away, was to collaborate, to really talk to people inside and outside your immediate field and truly work with them. When I was first an assistant professor, someone asked me, well, who are you working with? And I sort of took almost affront at that. I thought, well, I'm on my own now. I'm an independent scientist.
I can do this, yeah.
I'm my own person, running my lab. And it's true, you need to set your own agenda and have your unique identity, but truly believe that the best research stems from collaborations with others. You just can't do everything yourself. And increasingly, the best research is interdisciplinary, where there are merging of viewpoints and a team coming together at a problem from multiple angles. And so it took me a while to get there, but just great advice that I received early on.
Definitely great advice. And I think thinking about the projects that I know that have been funded recently, a lot of them are these interdisciplinary collaborative efforts. So not only important for making great research, but for even getting the money to make the great research. So
Absolutely.
Well, fantastic advice, Jennifer. Is there any other last piece of advice or a last note of inspiration that you want to end our interview on today?
We talked a little bit about balance in life, and as many people would say, I don't think it's possible to do it all. But I would like to say I do think it's possible to be truly excited, passionate about research and science, but also to have fun outside of work, to be a good parent if you have kids, to be a supportive partner if you have one. And no matter what, to retain a sense of morality and of self, even when you're in that kind of competitive career atmosphere. I feel like too often I see people operating as if they're living in some sort of zero-sum game where only some people can win. It's unfortunate because people usually get into science, I think, because they're excited about making a difference or learning something. And those things are things that we should be able to do without having only one person win in a certain environment. So I just really think it's important to retain that perspective.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful note to end on, Jennifer. Can you tell our listeners now how they can reach out if they want to learn more about you and the work you do?
Absolutely. Listeners can email me and my lab group at stress@psu.edu. And they could certainly also learn more about my research from our lab website, which I'd be happy to give you.
Perfect. Well, we will put that on our website. And listeners, definitely reach out if you have any questions, if you want to learn more. And Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a piece of your own story.
Thank you. It was a real privilege. Thanks for inviting me to join you.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you here with us today. And listeners, it was a pleasure to spend some time with you as well as always. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.